Imagine this. You're an alien student just arrived on Earth, studying medicine with a mix of curiosity and caution. Then, during your very first field exercise, a human trainee calmly says, "Just pop it back in, dislocated shoulders aren't a big deal." You stare in horror as they do exactly that. You came expecting biology, not battlefield surgery. For most species, a paper cut is a medical emergency. For humans, a missing limb is just a Tuesday, if the bleeding's under control. What kind of species treats broken bones with duct tape until the medics arrive? Welcome to Earth. Welcome to Death World Medicine, where the pain threshold is high, the adrenaline higher, and the first rule of first aid seems to be, don't die, fix it later. Imagine arriving on a planet where everything is a little too loud, too fast, and too dangerous. The gravity pulls harder, the atmosphere is thicker, and even the wildlife seems suspiciously aggressive. Now imagine you're a student. A medical student, no less, sent here as part of an interspecies exchange program. You've trained in sterile environments, studied gentle species with delicate biology, and learned to treat injury as a careful, measured process. You've been taught that pain is serious, injury is alarming, and any trauma should be met with immediate stabilization and caution. Now you're on Earth, and everything you know is about to be shattered. Your first day in practical training, you're observing human first aid procedures. A human trainee walks confidently toward an injured classmate who's holding a clearly dislocated shoulder. You flinch, expecting a call for sedation, a stretcher, or at least some medical equipment. But instead, you hear this terrifyingly casual line, "Just pop it back in." Dislocated shoulders aren't a big deal. Before you can process what's happening, the human grabs the arm and with a loud pop resets the joint. You feel your stomach twist, your brain screams that something has gone terribly wrong, but the injured human, they exhale sharply, give a grim smile, and thank their classmate for the help. No panic, no emergency medical response, just a quick fix and a shrug. This is when it hits you. Humans are not like other species. On most worlds, injury is treated with reverence and concern. An avulsion or fracture might result in quarantine and intensive care. A cut that bleeds freely would be cause for immediate alarm. But on Earth, humans are known, even proud, of surviving things that would be fatal anywhere else. They are creatures of chaos, evolutionarily sculpted by a planet that tried very hard to kill them at every turn. Their first aid is not a gentle science. It's survival. It's improvisation. It's brute force biology in action. You watch in disbelief as another trainee uses a belt to make a tourniquet, calmly describing how to stop arterial bleeding in an emergency. Someone else talks about using superglue to seal minor wounds. They speak of field dressings, trauma kits, and chest decompression with a level of comfort usually reserved for basic hygiene on other planets. A missing fingertip, wrap it up and keep moving. A broken rib, don't worry unless it punctures a lung. Loss of consciousness, as long as they wake up soon, they're probably fine. Probably even the instructors don't flinch. They speak about pressure points, splinting with whatever's at hand, and battlefield triage methods that prioritize saving lives, not minimizing pain. There is an unspoken rule: pain is temporary. Survival is mandatory. Fix it now, treat the pain later. And then someone tells you the real kicker. These aren't even military medics. These are just civilians. In your world, a torn ligament would require surgical intervention and days of recovery. On Earth, humans might tape it up, pop a few painkillers, and finish their shift. Not because they're reckless, though some are, but because they can. Their bodies are robust, self-repairing, and terrifyingly tolerant of trauma. Their immune systems are aggressive. Their bones heal quickly. Their pain tolerance is absurd. And it's not just biology, it's culture. Humans grow up learning to walk it off, rub dirt in it, keep calm, and carry on. Their stories are filled with people who survive against all odds, patch themselves up, and continue fighting. For them, first aid isn't just about treatment, it's about empowerment. It's about knowing how to act when no one else is around. It's a mindset as much as a skill set. As an alien student, watching all of this unfold is both fascinating and horrifying. Your textbooks did not prepare you for this. Theories don't capture the sound of a shoulder being relocated in real time. Charts don't reflect the grit in a human's eyes when they say, "I'm fine," with blood on their shirt. You start to understand why other species call Earth a death world. It's not just the terrain Or the predators, it's the humans themselves. They've adapted to the chaos, they've embraced it, and their first aid tactics reflect that same brutal efficiency, a dance with danger stitched together with duct tape and sheer willpower. You came here expecting science. What you found is survival. Welcome to Earth. They told you Earth was dangerous, a death world, they called it. But no briefing could truly prepare you for what that meant. You thought it referred to the wildlife, the pathogens, the climate instability. What you didn't expect was to be shocked in the middle of a university clinic, surrounded not by wild predators, but by smiling, absurdly calm humans, calmly performing what, to you, looked like battlefield surgery. The day started normally enough. You, along with a handful of other off-world students, were assigned to observe a basic human first aid training session. The goal was simple: watch and learn. Understand how humans respond to minor injuries, pick up some cross-species care practices, maybe ask a few polite questions, and then, 10 minutes in, someone dislocates a shoulder, you freeze. On your homeworld, this would mean trauma. Teams, advanced sedation, precision robotics to realign the joint under sterile conditions. Here, the injured student winces, rolls their eyes, and says it's out again. A friend immediately volunteers, hold still, I've got you. You assume they're joking, they are not. With a practiced grip and a grimace, the friend wrenches the arm, and you hear a sickening pop. The shoulder is back. In place, no anesthesia, no medical tools, just sheer nerve and bare hands. And somehow, the human who just had their joint reset is thanking them. You nearly faint. This isn't medicine, not as you know it. This is something else entirely, something brutal, something improvised, something disturbingly effective. The rest of the session confirms it. Humans approach injury with a mindset shaped by the planet that made them. Cuts are cauterized in the field with heated metal. Wounds are cleaned with alcohol that could strip paint. Tourniquets are made from belts and t-shirts. Bones are braced with sticks and tape. Bleeding is a problem if it doesn't stop, not necessarily if it starts. Pain, it turns out, is not an emergency on Earth. It's just a suggestion. One student demonstrates how to use a credit card to seal a sucking chest wound. Another tells a story of hiking 20 kilometers on a sprained ankle because there was no signal and I wasn't gonna just sit there. A third proudly reveals the scar from an appendectomy which was performed in a remote field hospital with local anesthesia and some morphine after the fact. You find yourself wondering, what kind of species accepts suffering as normal? What kind of people willingly endure such trauma without demanding immediate intervention? The answer, clearly, is humans. Even their instructors talk differently. Don't panic, manage the bleed, secure the airway, treat for shock. And not once do they mention waiting for advanced help as the first course of action. Everything about their training is focused on self-reliance. You don't wait, you act. You don't freeze, you adapt. You start to understand that human first aid is not only a response to injury, it's a philosophy of resilience, a cultural embrace of chaos and survival. To them, injury is not an anomaly. It's an expected part of existence. You fall, you bleed, you patch it, you keep going. To you, it's terrifying. To them, it's Tuesday. It slowly dawns on you that this is why humans are feared and admired across the galaxy. They are not just survivors, they are relentless. Give them thread and they'll stitch a wound, give them pressure and they'll stop the bleeding. Take away their tools and they'll find another way. It's not carelessness, it's competence in the face of catastrophe. You glance around at your fellow off-world students. One is pale, gripping their data tablet like a shield. Another has quietly begun recording everything, probably for their government's threat assessment files. You're just trying not to look nauseous. Then a human notices your expression and laughs, not mockingly, but warmly. Don't worry. They say, we only pop things back in if it's really necessary. You don't find that reassuring. Still, a strange feeling starts to rise in you. It's not comfort, exactly, but something closer to awe. You're beginning to see the logic. If you can't rely on clean clinics and controlled environments, you need to learn to improvise. On a world that constantly throws danger your way, you don't wait to be saved. You learn to save yourself and others with whatever you've got. That's what you're really learning in this classroom. Not just how to treat a wound, but how to be ready, how to face the worst and still act, how to be just a little more human. And suddenly, this death world doesn't seem quite so terrifying, just tougher than you thought. You think you've seen intensity, you've studied battlefield medicine, you've watched trauma response drills from 5 different species. You've handled simulations with simulated screams, calculated loss of pressure and vacuum injuries, even practiced emergency surgeries on synthetic organs. So, when you enrolled in the interspecies medical exchange on Earth, you expected to be challenged, but within reason. That expectation lasted exactly 6 minutes. It started with a demonstration on dealing with common musculoskeletal injuries, a basic introduction to human trauma response. The instructor, a compact human with a weathered face and a cheerful demeanor, was walking the group through what to do when someone dislocates a shoulder. You listened, took notes. Nothing seemed out of place until he waved a volunteer forward. The volunteer rolled up his sleeve and casually said, "I've had this shoulder come out a few times. Go ahead and use me as a demo." What followed would have been classified as an act of violence on your homeworld. With minimal warning, the instructor grasped the volunteer's arm, applied swift force, and reset the shoulder with an audible pop that made several alien observers flinch. The volunteer barely winced and then, absurdly, thanked the instructor. Other human trainees applauded. You were still trying to process what had just happened when the instructor said, "Now pair up and try it yourselves on a dummy, not a real person, please." You couldn't move, you weren't even sure you were breathing. To you, this was a trauma procedure, something that should only occur under sedation, in a sterilized chamber, surrounded by monitoring equipment and medical staff. To humans, it was a practical skill, no more shocking than applying a bandage or tying a knot. That was only the beginning. Next came wound management. You watched as students demonstrated how to pack a deep laceration with gauze and apply pressure until clotting occurred. One of them joked, "You know it's working if it hurts," and the others laughed. They laughed. Then the instructor handed out a selection of improvised tools: belts for tourniquets, sticks and rags for splints, plastic cards to seal open chest wounds. Someone asked what to do if the victim lost consciousness. The answer: if they're not dead, keep treating. Airway, breathing, circulation. Don't stop until someone better shows up, or until they wake up. On your world, no citizen would be expected to manage that level of trauma unaided. On Earth, it was presented as a normal civic responsibility. First aid here wasn't about stabilizing until help arrived. First aid was the help. The message was clear. Assume no one is coming. Know enough to survive anyway. You tried to imagine one of your own kind applying pressure to a bleeding artery while administering CPR and trying to build a splint from tree branches. The very thought felt surreal, but humans, they trained for that. They expect it. One story stuck with you. A trainee recounted a time their friend fell through a glass door. While most would freeze or panic, this human applied pressure, wrapped the wound in a sweatshirt, and called for help all within 90 seconds. I knew what to do, they said, shrugging like it was no big deal. You just don't let people bleed out. It's common sense, common sense. It was then you realized something deeper was at work. This wasn't just about biology, though, to be fair, humans do heal fast, tolerate pain absurdly well, and seem genetically engineered to withstand catastrophe. But even more striking was their culture, a shared belief that anyone might be called on to act. They don't wait for rescue. They become rescue. Pain is temporary. Action is vital. You do what's needed, even if it hurts. By the end of the session, you weren't afraid anymore, just humbled. These creatures, often dismissed as reckless or primitive by other civilizations, had forged a medical culture from necessity, instinct, and unrelenting resolve. Where others fear blood, they reach for gauze. Where others freeze in panic, they get to work. And as you packed up your notes, the instructor smiled and said, "Don't worry, you'll get used to it." We all do. It's just first aid the human way. You nodded, unsure whether to laugh or salute, because deep down you understood something had changed. You had come to Earth expecting to learn about humans. But today you learned what it means to be one, and somehow you weren't quite the same. You knew Earth had a reputation. The interstellar archives called it a death world, a term that always sounded dramatic until you set foot here. The gravity pulled harder than expected. The air was thick with allergens, microbes, and microscopic threats. But what surprised you most wasn't predators or the atmosphere. It was the humans, and not just any humans, medical trainees. The first practical class began without fanfare. You were seated near the back, observing with quiet fascination. Around you were alien students from various species, some adapted for low-gravity environments, others covered in bioarmor or soft bioluminescent skin. You all had one thing in common: a cautious respect for injury. The instructor introduced a lesson on responding to trauma in the field. You assumed it would involve careful demonstrations, sterile protocols, and conservative treatment methods. Instead, it started with someone screaming. A human trainee had volunteered to simulate a dislocation. You braced for special effects, perhaps a simulation model, but no, shoulder was real, and so was the injury. The pop echoed across the room like a firecracker. You flinched, others did too. One student from a low-gravity world fainted. The injured human grimaced, rolled his arm and said, "Ah, much better." His classmate clapped him on the back. Everyone else carried on like this was an everyday event, because to them it was. You had read about their resilience, seen charts on their pain tolerance, heard whispered stories of humans performing surgery on themselves when isolated. But seeing it, hearing the nonchalance in their voices, it shook you. The instructor smiled and moved on. "Now, let's go over trauma bleeding. You've got 3 minutes to improvise with what's in your pockets." Out came shoelaces, belts, cloth scraps. Tourniquets were fashioned with terrifying efficiency. One student used their ID badge to create a pressure applicator. Someone else asked if they could use a pen as a makeshift airway tube. The answer, yes, but be careful not to puncture the trachea at the wrong angle. At the wrong angle on your world, such a procedure would be done by licensed trauma surgeons after a full scan and pre-op assessment. Here, it was discussed like a minor inconvenience. The humans weren't being reckless, far from it. They were being practical, trained, ready. Their entire approach to injury was shaped by the understanding that help might not come, that delays were fatal, that if you wanted to survive, you needed to act now. It wasn't bravery, it was baseline behavior. You watched as they practiced splinting broken limbs using rulers, pencils, and sticks. They discussed how to tell if someone was going into shock. They demonstrated how to use body heat to keep a victim warm in sub-zero conditions. One of them casually mentioned once stitching up a gash on their leg with a sewing needle because the hospital was too far away. It wasn't just the techniques that unsettled you. It was how calm they were, joking, helping each other. No one panicked. No one hesitated. There was a phrase humans like to use, keep calm and carry on. You had seen it printed on shirts, mugs, and posters. Now you saw it lived out in real time. By the end of the session, your understanding of medicine of survival had been rewritten. You realized that on Earth, the line between civilian and combat medic is blurred. Everyone is taught the basics. Everyone is expected to step in. A small alien beside you, from a species with no natural predators, leaned over and whispered, "Are all humans like this?" You could only nod, because what else could you say? These weren't soldiers or elite responders. These were university students, and yet they treated gushing wounds and dislocated joints with same ease others apply an adhesive strip, and the humans, noticing your unease, didn't mock you. They explained. They offered to show you how to apply a tourniquet. One even handed you a roll of gauze and said, "Want to try?" You hesitated, then took it. That was the most human thing of all. Not just the resilience or the pain tolerance, but the willingness to teach, to share, to include you in their relentless will. Survive and help others survive too. You came to Earth thinking Deathworlders were dangerous, and they are. But not because they love danger, because they refuse to let it win. You had read the classification reports: Earth, Type 5 Deathworld, hostile biosphere, unpredictable weather, apex predators, volatile atmosphere, the kind of planet most species avoid or visit only in armored suits. And yet, humans not only survived here, they thrived. Still, no dossier, no scientific briefing, no simulation prepared you for what you witnessed in that Earth-based medical training facility. It began innocuously, a cross-cultural educational exchange. You were here to observe how humans taught basic trauma care to civilians. You expected some anatomical differences, perhaps a few strange chemical compounds in their medications. What you did not expect was psychological whiplash. The instructor welcomed everyone with a cheerful nod. We're going to start with dislocations today. Shoulders are most common. Anyone here ever had one pop out before? Several hands went up. One student, a lean human with short hair and a wide grin, said, "Mine slips out all the time. You can use me." You assumed this was a theoretical example. It wasn't. Before you could question it, the instructor motioned the student forward, gave a warning nod, and with a swift, practiced motion, rotated the human's arm until you heard a deep pop. The student hissed through his teeth, rotated the shoulder, and gave a thumbs up. Back in. Feels good. You stared, stunned. This was not a simulation. This was not virtual training. That human had voluntarily dislocated and relocated a joint in real time in a classroom. Around you, your fellow off-world students looked equally shaken. A reptilian species beside you twitched involuntarily. A soft-bodied aquatic species covered its eyes, and the humans, they were passing around ice packs like they were snacks. You wanted to raise your hand to ask what emergency precautions had been in place, what backup trauma protocols had been activated. But no one else seemed concerned. The instructor simply moved on. Next, let's review hemorrhage control, she said, as if nothing bizarre had happened. You have 3 minutes to stop a simulated arterial bleed. You may only use items on your person. Within moments, belts became tourniquets. Socks became pressure dressings. A student took apart a pen and mimed using it as a windlass. You watched one trainee make a makeshift compression pad from their jacket lining and tape it to a mannequin's groin wound using electrical cord. You had never seen such improvisation, not in a lab, not in combat, not anywhere. Then came the stories. They told tales like they were casual anecdotes, crashing bicycles, falling off rooftops, stepping on nails, slicing hands open in kitchens. Each story came with a solution. I ducked, taped it shut. I used tweezers and superglue. I passed out, but I woke up with it already scabbed over. All spoken with absolute calm, even humor. What made it worse or better, depending on your perspective, was how competent they were, not reckless. Not foolish, just efficient, focused, relentlessly practical. You began to understand that human first aid wasn't just a skill. It was a worldview. Other species treat injury as a rare event to be avoided at all costs. On Earth, it's an everyday reality. First aid here isn't about stabilization until medical professionals arrive. It's about being the first and possibly only responder. It's about keeping someone alive long enough for hope to catch up. Never assume help is on the way. One instructor said, "You are the help. Don't freeze. Do something." That was the motto. Do something, even if it's imperfect. Even if it hurts, even if you're scared. One trainee summed it up perfectly when asked how they remained so calm under pressure. "You don't have time to panic when someone's bleeding out," she said. "You move, you breathe, you act, then you process it later. You thought you came to learn about humans, to study them from a safe, clinical distance. But halfway through the session, when they handed you a trauma dressing and told you to practice applying pressure, something changed. You didn't flinch, you didn't panic, you acted, not perfectly, not confidently, but you did it, because on Earth, hesitation can cost lives. And humans have learned, through centuries of fire and flood and violence, that survival favors those who do not wait. It wasn't until the end of the day that you realized what made their methods so effective. It wasn't their biology, though that helped. It wasn't even their pain tolerance. It was their instinct to care immediately, instinctively, with whatever tools they had, even if it meant putting themselves at risk. That's what truly shocked you, not the gore, not the grit, but the sheer, unwavering will to help, no matter how bad it looked. And that, more than anything else, is what defines them. Deathworlders, yes, but also first responders. There's a moment when your world, you shatters not with a bang, but with the quiet, confident words of a human first aid instructor. Dislocations are easy, you just have to be firm and fast. You were there as an observer, one of several alien exchange students selected to study human emergency medicine practices. Earth was infamous, after all, a Class 5 death world, where life evolved through endless trauma, and survival wasn't a luxury but a requirement. You thought you understood what that meant. You didn't. The session began like any academic seminar. Chairs in neat rows, students taking notes, instructors with holo displays and diagrams. The topic was musculoskeletal trauma, specifically joint dislocations. You were expecting anatomical theory, maybe a demonstration on a model, but then a human volunteer raised their hand and said, "Mine pops out all the time. Want to show them with me?" There was laughter. Agreement, encouragement. Before you could protest or even process what was happening, the instructor had the volunteer seated and grasped his arm. A few guiding words, a quick motion, a sickening pop. You recoiled. The sound triggered your species' pain reflex. Beside you, a delicate avian delegate dropped their data pad. The aquatic student to your left quietly made a note in their translator. Reevaluate human pain limits. But the human. He rotated his shoulder with a grin. Yeah, that's better. Thanks. Thanks, where you come from. Such a procedure would require anesthesia, diagnostic scans, perhaps a brief coma. Induction protocol. Here, it was a warm-up act, a live demo, and the humans were barely impressed. Then came bleeding control. The instructor gave a simple prompt. Imagine you're hiking and someone falls, their legs cut. You've got 60 seconds to stop them from bleeding out. What followed was chaos efficient, practiced chaos. Humans ripped open clothing, tied tourniquets with belts and shoelaces, packed simulated wounds with shirts. One used a plastic card to seal an open chest wound. Another mimed applying pressure with their knee while calling for help. All done with casual focus, as though they'd done this before. Many of them had. One student shared a story of how they saved a friend's life on a camping trip after a knife accident. Another described pulling someone from a car crash and using a tampon to plug a deep wound until the paramedics arrived. Their tone was matter of fact, almost routine. You began to realize something that chilled you more than the gore. To humans, emergency wasn't an interruption of normal life. It was life. They didn't act shocked. They acted ready. Their bodies, you already knew, were absurdly durable. Bones that could fracture and heal, skin that closed over wounds with time and scar tissue, organs that compensated for injury. But what truly set them apart wasn't biological, it was mental. They trained for worst-case scenarios. They expected things to go wrong. They planned to survive it, not perfectly, but persistently. You watched as one trainee wrapped a makeshift sling around a dummy's arm, holding it in place with a carabiner and a strip of cloth torn from their shirt. "This'll hold until we get them off the trail," she said, and that's when it hit you. These people didn't see injuries as isolated events. They saw them as obstacles to be managed on the way to the next challenge, a dislocation, fix it and move. Bleeding, stop it and carry on. Fracture, stabilize and find a ride. You weren't watching medicine. You were watching adaptability, weaponized. By the end of the session, you were silent, not from fear, but from realization. You finally understood what made Earth such a paradox, impossibly dangerous, and yet home to the galaxy's most resilient species. Not because humans were fearless, they weren't. They joked about their fears, they acknowledged pain. But they acted anyway. That was their strength. One of them caught your expression and nudged your shoulder. "Freaked out?" she asked not unkindly. You nodded. "It's okay," she said. "First time I saw a compound fracture I nearly passed out. But you learn, and you do what you have to." You believed her. Because in that room full of blood simulations and improvised trauma gear, you saw no panic, only purpose. Earth was dangerous, yes, but humans were something else, not just survivors, responders.